unique panelist and moderator. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jim O'Leary, who leads Edelman's 800-person corporate communications practice in the United States, Canada, and Latin America. Edelman is the world's largest communications marketing agency, a real powerhouse. Jim has led communications teams for some of the world's largest technology and aerospace companies, including HP, GE Aviation, and was formerly a communications leader for Honeywell Aerospace. Please help me in welcoming Jim and our panelists.
All right, hello, welcome. Very exciting time, clearly, for commercial space, and come on over. Also an exciting time for communications, marketing, and media within the commercial space sector. We're going to have a great conversation with your three distinguished panelists here. And before we do, I'll just do some quick intros, make sure I don't get anyone's names or titles wrong. Everyone here probably knows Jeff Foust from SpaceNews. Covers civil and commercial space for the publication and has spent the last decade covering commercial space, and also founded two websites, Space Today and Space Review. Caitlin O'Keefe, also to my left, your right, Director of Marketing and Communications at Planetary Resources. Caitlin began her career in digital media, digital marketing, working for clients like Amazon, Xbox, and Nintendo. And she moved to aerospace to work for a local aerodynamics company several years ago, and was introduced to Planetary Resources through some STEM high school work and Museum of Flight. And last but not least is Brooke Salkoff, who is the Director of Communications at Sierra Nevada Corporation, a company that many of you are familiar with, of course, named one of the world's top 10 most innovative companies in space recently. And Brooke is a 20-plus year media veteran, including a decade with NBC News. So to start things off, why don't I start with you, Brooke? And I think we're going to start with the same question for everyone, just to give everyone a little bit of background. Brooke, why don't you just take a minute and talk about your background and how you got to where you are today as Director of Communications for SNC?
Okay. So I come to SNC, as Jim mentioned, after a career in television news. I started off in local markets across the country, which was a great place to figure out what people really wanted to learn and how to get and hold their attention, which is helpful in almost any career that you could undertake after that. Then I moved up. I was national correspondent for NBC News for 11 years, covering, you name it, 9/11, the 2000 election, anthrax, Y2K, financial debacles, hurricanes, I mean, you name it. And we did it for all 200 plus NBC affiliates across the country, including K5 News here in Seattle. And I still, even after the career in news, or maybe because of it, I find myself going to where the story is. And the commercial space industry is growing. I think the common understanding of its current impact on real people and its potential for impact is not well understood. So that's an exciting place to be. Everything that the folks here in this room are doing is having an impact on real people, and making sure that that story gets told is really exciting to me. SNC has a really unique story because it's founded, it's owned now by a husband and wife team. They've never taken a dime of outside investment, and they've grown it from 20 people to 3,000 people, mostly in the US, but around the world too, a global aerospace and defense company. And as Mark Sarangelo, the head of our space systems business area, discussed this morning, we have an exciting contract with NASA now as of this year. So it's a really fun place to be, and being able to tell that story in a compelling and coherent way is sounds like a great job to me.
All right. Jeff?
Yeah, my career path probably has not been duplicated by other folks out there. While I am journalism now, my educational background is not in journalism. I went to two schools not known for their journalism programs, Caltech and MIT. I was trained to be a planetary scientist, decided not to pursue a career in academia. I worked a little bit in the dot-com world, right when the dot-com boom went bust, circa 2000. Worked for a number of years for an aerospace consulting company called Futron that some of you here may be familiar with. It's done a number of studies about the space industry over the years. But I was always interested in writing about and following the space industry because there's so many interesting stories going on. There's a lot of interest in space, and there's been a lot of efforts to try and capitalize on that interest and try and build and grow a space industry and realize a lot of the visions of space advocates that I've had over the years. So following those ups and downs of the industry over the years has been something that's been of interest to me. So that's why I was doing a lot of writing on the side, even back when I was in grad school in the 1990s. A couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to actually become a journalist full-time and join the staff of SpaceNews. I suspect most of you are familiar with SpaceNews. It is has been around for more than 25 years. It is sort of the industry publication of record for the space industry, I think it's safe to say. It was a weekly print publication for most of its history. We're on the web, and we have a bi-weekly print magazine, which you should have gotten in your conference materials. The print magazine allows us to do some more long-form features and profiles and so on, while the website does a lot of news stories coming out of that. So, you know, I'm really fascinated about what's going on. I think this is a very interesting time for the space industry in general, and particularly for the entrepreneurial space industry. There are a lot of ventures coming up, a lot of money coming into this industry. Still a lot of questions about which companies can succeed and why. And that's what makes me interested in following the story and following a lot of the individuals and companies and organizations that are involved in this.
All right. Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin O'Keefe, Director of Marketing and Communications for Planetary Resources, and I go a little further back in my career because it has to, kind of where I ended up, has to do exactly with what Jeff and Brooke are talking about, which is, you know, that this is the place to be right now. All the stories are here, and it's a really interesting place. When I was in high school, I was very creative, but I was also really interested in astronomy and science, and I'll never forget this kind of turning point in my high school career where, you know, I wanted to pursue science and astronomy, but I didn't quite know what that meant with kind of balancing the creative side of who I am. And I had this chemistry test filling out the periodic table. And I was so excited about it, and I was at this point a solid C student at best, and so if I aced this test, it just would have been like an amazing thing for my life. But I knew I was going to ace it. I studied it. I was so into it, and I turned my test in. The teacher wrote a big fat F on it, and I looked at him and I said, "Oh my gosh, what happened? I know I got everything right. Here's helium. Here's nitrogen." And he said, "Well, you know, helium is H lowercase e, and you wrote H uppercase E," and because I write in all caps. And so I got immediately turned off, and, you know, kind of my creative side of my brain and, you know, my penmanship got in the way of kind of acing this science test. And I've kind of set the stage for me not knowing, you know, going forward, where do I fit in as a communicator in a science-based and technology-based industry? And so after college, I majored in communications from Santa Clara University. I went on into digital media, as you know, Jim was saying, and worked on consumer clients and had a lot of fun, but I just knew that it just wasn't my underlying passion. And because of what Brooke and Jeff are talking about right now with these visible stories that came out about the emergence of this, you know, private space sector, the new space sector is why we're all here today. I started to see what Elon was doing. I started to see what Bezos was doing, what Paul Allen was doing, and all these big corporations putting dollars behind private ventures. And I thought, you know, light bulb, there's a place for a consumer marketer now in the space industry. I gotta go get this. And it took me, you know, a couple years of gaining mentorship, and many of you mentors of mine are in this room, so thank you for all the time, Erica Wagner. You know, just kind of self-teaching about, you know, astronomy and the whole sector. And I got my first break working for Raisbeck Engineering, and James Raisbeck is a big founder of the Raisbeck Aviation High School. So I spent a lot of time at your high school. And I worked for a couple years in aerodynamics at a very small company. So as a marketer, I was able to have hands-on experience with how something's manufactured, something I've never done before. Talk to the engineers every day, learn through osmosis, and learn how to be their translator so I can go out and tell the story of our company and sell our product. And it's through my connections at that time with the Museum of Flight in Seattle, a fantastic organization. I owe them my career. Comfortable saying that. Doug King is in here, thank you. And my time at Raisbeck Aviation High School, that I met the people at Planetary Resources who are very passionate about STEM education, which is why they were hanging out at those organizations. And took my career to Planetary Resources, arguably one of the most audacious, visionary companies that's ever been. And now my job is the most fun thing you could ever imagine. I get to tell the story about what's going on inside the walls of a company full of 50 of the most brilliant people in this world, and how we're advancing our technology to, expand the economic sphere of humanity into the solar system. So I'm just happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be alongside two people that I admire in my career, Brooke and Jeff, and Jim, who are teaching someone like me a lot who is very new to the industry. So thanks for being by my side.
Absolutely. So I think, Brooke, you're probably actually the newest to the space industry, having spent a good amount of your career in broadcast journalism. What, in that transition, did you learn that might be of use or of interest to others as they think about communications and marketing in commercial space sector?
Well, let's see. So I joined Sierra Nevada Corporation in August of last year. I should say that I had some years in between the time I was in the news business and the time I joined Sierra Nevada Corporation. So I think that one of the things that I've learned since joining SNC, stems from one of those stops in between when I was in the tech and venture capital world in Washington, D.C. I was a partner at a tech fund where we invested in really, really young companies. And some of those young companies, there's so many entrepreneurs in this room, and I was one of them, actually, because before I joined this tech fund, I was an entrepreneur myself of a small tech company, CEO of a young tech company. And so I know the temptation to try to get attention, because you need to raise money and you need to get your first customer, or you need to get press attention that would lead to either of those two things. And so there's a real temptation when you're an entrepreneur to sell the dream. And a lot of times when you're doing the pitching, when you're pitching investors over and over and over again, you get caught up and living in this no man's land between reality and fantasy of what's really possible now and what will be possible, or what you are selling as a possibility within a certain span of time. And sometimes you can even get confused about what's fantasy and what's reality. And so when you're that young entrepreneur and you're trying to get attention, a lot of times when you're dealing with the Jeff Foust of the world, you can forget where you really are. And you're selling the dream. You're going to say anything in order to get that press attention, because you need the customer, you need the cash infusion. And what I have learned in making that transition from the tech and venture capital world to a place like Sierra Nevada Corporation is that you can't put a price tag on your own credibility. The entrepreneurs who are selling the dream and selling their vision in order to get that first bit of press attention or whatever, the investment, unless they can realistically follow through on that pitch within the span of time that they're promising, then they are undermining their own long-term interests, because if they don't pull through on that, as many of you guys know, then you're dead. So I guess that's the biggest sort of lesson in going from the tech and venture world in the really small company where you're going from an idea or a concept to something real, is that you can't put a price tag on your own credibility. And so don't cut off your nose to spite your face, because if you don't fulfill your own promises that you're selling to Jeff Foust or some investor, then you're not going to survive anyway. When you're at a place like Sierra Nevada Corporation, your credibility and your reputation is all you have, especially when you have customers that are NASA and the government. You don't mess with those relationships and that credibility. So I would say, even when you're a young company, you have to do what you say you're going to do in order to earn the trust of your first customer and then every customer after that.
That's a great point. And Jeff, you know, as a reporter, you spend a good amount of your time sorting between the hype and the hyperbole. Can you tell us a little bit about how you go about doing that on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, a lot of things come into my mailbox, press releases and so on. Certainly monitoring what is going on, talking to sources, and so on. I think, you know, really the question is, well, what sort of makes an interesting story for us? Certainly, when a company makes a major achievement, good or bad, that's something that catches our attention. I'm going to sort of follow up and try and put that in perspective and better understand the significance of it. You know, and that evolves over time. What we've seen is, as this commercial space industry has evolved, for example, is a few years ago, if a company got any amount of venture capital funding, that was a major news story because there was so little venture capital funding. Now, when a company gets a venture capital round, it's like, well, okay, you know, that's great. Another company's got VC funding. What are you going to do with it? What does this mean for the market? Being able to put that into perspective, you know, and also sort of judge what some of the plans and proposals these companies are making, and try and judge, you know, how realistic some of these plans are. One nature of the space industry, and aerospace in general, is that schedules slip. Sometimes they slip a lot. And try and judge whether, if a company is falling behind schedule, that's simply because of the nature of aerospace, that so many things fall behind schedule, that shouldn't be surprising, or if there's something more significant going on, if there's a fundraising problem, if there's a technical issue, or if they've run into a regulatory roadblock that they can't get something done that's causing them to fall behind schedule. Trying to weigh all of those things and be able to put that into perspective. So really, you know, the big issue that we're looking at is, particularly when you're looking at a particularly dynamic marketplace industry as commercial space is now, trying to sort things out, and if a company says that they're going to do something by a certain date, you know, doing a little due diligence to determine if they've got the capabilities and technical and financial wherewithal to be able to achieve on that. And that's sort of an everyday challenge for all of us, is to try and see, you know, judge a lot of the credibility of what's going on.
What do you think in general, if you had to kind of provide a brief update on the state of journalism in the commercial space sector, and maybe some of the changes that you've been seeing over the past years or past decade? Talk about that for a moment. Yeah.
Well, first of all, the space media sector is a very tiny part of the overall media ecosystem, if you will. There are only really a few publications that devote a significant part of their resources to space, and you see a lot of both the advances and challenges of media in general. Certainly, one of the great things about the explosion of the internet is that it's much easier to start up a publication. I've done it myself. To be able to go out and do things, to be able to experiment with new forms of media, social media, multimedia, and so on. A lot of great things you can do with that. But a lot of times there's simply a challenge on the business side. The print advertising that fueled so much of media, whether it's aerospace or general media, has been drying up, and the digital advertising that's coming to its place is not making up for it. You know, it's digital dimes replacing print dollars, which means you've got a pretty big shortfall to deal with. So we've got those issues. I don't think that's necessarily any different than a lot of media in general. We face a lot of the same obstacles in that respect. You know, sort of one sort of related issue I'd want to sort of keep in mind here is that we're talking a lot about space media, but I think for companies out there, space media is only one small part of the overall media you're going to be dealing with, and you're going to have to treat media as a plural term. I'll put it that way. There are different reporters with different backgrounds and different expertise that you will probably be dealing with your companies, whether it's a local business reporter who wants to know what this fundraising round means for hiring new employees, or whether somebody's on the technology side who wants more details about this, you know, particular technology that you've developed for your business. So it's not just the space media that you're going to be dealing with, but it's a much broader part of the media, and you need to anticipate that and deal with their interests and their backgrounds accordingly.
Caitlin, I know you deal with a wide variety of media given all your various audiences. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, just to stem exactly from what Jeff's saying is, every pitch is different. We deal with, mainstream like CNBC and, NBC, CBS. You saw local news stations here yesterday filming, and then there, the Jeffs of the world who are studied in the sector that they're writing about. And you just have to always be prepared and do your research. As someone, you can't just send out a media advisory and expect everyone to take it the same way and write the same story. You also can't expect journalists to write the story that necessarily you want to see. You can't write the headline. And that's just kind of the respectful part of the whole industry is we do our best as communicators to set up our journalist friends with, enough information about the story, enough graphics that will help them showcase a compelling story. But ultimately, it's up to them to write it in the way that they see it. And, talking to a local news station versus talking to Jeff, that's very different. As, Brooke was saying this morning in our prep sessions, she has a lot of experience on TV, and maybe I can just hand it over to you and talk about, the difference between broadcast and print and how you approach that.
Well, and I think just media in general has changed so much in ways that folks in this room who've started their own companies can actually see as opportunities for themselves. Digital is now the starting point pretty much for everything. I mean, even if you really want to get on CNBC for your business, whether it actually makes air is going to depend a lot on whether what they post on CNBC.com actually gets a lot of views. So not only is digital content, it's usually where reporters often troll for the best stories, but it's also sort of a test market for whether something is actually going to capture people's attention. So, don't be disappointed if you pitch a story and it only ends up online and it doesn't end up in the print edition of the Washington Post or whatever. You might wait a few days because if it actually gets on WashingtonPost.com, then you might see it in print a few days later because it gets a lot of views. So the other opportunity, I think, for all of you is that more than ever, as Jeff sort of alluded to, reporters are stretched really, really thin. So I know from my own experience in TV, I guess my first national assignment was to go to Nashville because Al Gore was announcing that he was going to run for president. So that sort of dates me. But that was at a time when I think, like MSNBC had been on the air for like 5 years or something like that. And then by the time I left television in 2010, I was doing about 45 live shots in the morning on multiple stories. So it wasn't just a single story that was capturing people's attention. It was like, you had to basically cover everything, even in a single news cycle. So reporters are stretched really, really thin. And I think the biggest advantage that you can have over your competitors is to remember that reporters are people. They like their phone calls returned. They like common courtesy, and they're human. So, and they abide by a certain code too. So if you tell them that something is off the record, then their professional credibility and reputation is on the line if they sort of disrespect or disregard that. And they're also professionals, which means that, like Caitlin said, they're not there to promote your company. They're not there to sort of sell your product for you. They're there to sort of give a balanced and fair representation of what they see is going on. So usually if you spend the time to sort of educate them about the state of things and about what you're trying to accomplish, then that 99% of the time is going to be accurately reflected in their story. So a lot has changed. I mean, you can sort of start with digital and don't be disappointed if that's all you get, because it can lead to more than that. And then also reporters these days are stretched really thin. So if you're a good communicator and you can package your own story accurately and in a compelling way, create all of the multimedia assets, all the facts that can be substantiated, then chances are you're going to get some play somewhere. I mean, you guys all know, because you know sort of the state of news when you turn on the television or when you open the newspaper. There's a lot of just schlock out there. So it's your job to sort of cull it down into what's really compelling, what makes a difference to real people, and to sell it well. And if you can't sell it well to a reporter, you probably can't sell it well to your first potential customer. So it's a good exercise in your sales process and in your communications process, just because you'll probably sell it as well to a reporter as you will when you're out in the field actually trying to sell your product.
That's a great point. We've talked a bit about the rise of digital media. Caitlin, I know your background is in digital marketing, and you guys have done a good amount in the digital space over the past couple of years. You want to talk about some of your experience and lessons learned there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it kind of all comes back to, as a marketer, who your audiences are. And, we kind of have, 4 main audiences that we talk to. And one is certainly investors, customers, and the media. And the other one is, the community and fans, people who want to work for our company. And because that is such a prevalent and important audience to us, that kind of fan base and the community, we've really invested in a lot of digital media strategy. I can kind of rattle off some of the tools we use on a daily basis. Sprout Social helps me publish and gather data about all the things that we're publishing out to our community. And it's kind of we've developed this framework of these tool sets, but the content that we're putting out there is geared towards very specifically the goals of that audience. And so you'll see a lot of content that is about working at our company. Here's an inside look inside offices. We've recently invested in a Snapchat account, so if any of you are on Snapchat, follow us. And that is a very specific audience base. And we know that it's younger kids, aged like 15 to 24, are really prevalent on Snapchat. And so the content that we put on Snapchat is educational, it's inspirational, and it's also trying to get those kids to want to come have an internship with us or work for us someday. Whereas that content, probably doesn't belong on our corporate website. And so, but across the spectrum of all of the audiences you have and all the tools that we have set up digitally, like our website, like our social media streams, all of the content that we publish on any of those platforms reinforces every single audience. And so I kind of view marketing as a spectrum of awareness to sales. And if you look at our 4 audiences, investors and customers are certainly on the sales spectrum. And we want to sell them on our business idea. We want to sell them on the fact that we are going to generate tons of revenue through our technology developments. But on the other end, with our, kind of the media, which is also, in kind of the sales pitch category, but on the awareness end is the community, it's the fans, it's people who want to work for us. We're also selling the future vision of our company and our technology developments, but in the way that we want you to come build this technology for us. And so there's just kind of this spectrum that's created across all of your audiences, and you use each of your tools in your toolbox to provide insights so you're smarter about how to communicate with people. And give an example of that on our website with Google Analytics. And I have set up metrics to study where people go on each page. And actually, TJ, who's in the audience from Many Hands Agency, who's our agency of record, he built our website. So if you need a great website, talk to TJ. But those insights help me understand that once we publish a press release on the website that's geared towards our business, what happens to the people that hit that site? Do they go straight to jobs, or do they go straight to partnerships and investing and learning about the technology? So digital tools are awesome, and every day I learn something new about what people want to see from us by gathering the data, and then also testing by pushing content out across the digital platforms based on what I know today in the second about our audience's motivations.
That's great. And Brooke, any lessons learned on the digital front with SNC?
Let me see. Well, so we're redoing our website, which is really important. Mostly because one of my lessons at the Tech Fund is, and I think it's applicable basically to any industry and almost any company of any size, is if you want to measure your own progress or how you're having an impact on the company as an individual, see if you can boil it down to one number. Like, what is it? Is it number of new sales? Is it, in my case, you can just pick one. Pick a way to measure your impact. And one way to measure it, if you're a marketer or a communicator, is web traffic, like the number of uniques to your website. It's not a bad proxy for just general awareness and how you're able to change that. So for SNC, we've been mostly a quiet company because a lot of our work has been in the defense area, so in contracts with the Pentagon. But now we're spending a lot of time and energy promoting the work of our space systems business area under Mark Sarangelo. And that it has a much greater opportunity in terms of capturing the public's imagination and making people really excited about the future of the commercial space industry. And so there are many more opportunities to try to sell that story in a compelling way. So one of the ways that I can measure whether I'm making a difference for SNC in that area is to get basic tools in place so that I can measure the traffic, and then I know whether any sort of campaigns that I'm undertaking in this set span of time are actually making a measurable difference to web traffic. So we'll roll out the new website within a couple of months, and it'll communicate basically our broad capabilities at Sierra Nevada Corporation. And then over time, I'll be able to tell, because that'll be my baseline of web traffic, and then over time, I'll be able to tell whether paid campaigns are making a difference on our web traffic, how much I'm really able to drive traffic to our website to showcase the work that we're doing, and then as Caitlin, just sort of the standard ways of measuring like how people are navigating through the website. Are they more interested in our careers? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from Colorado, where space systems and our ISR business area are? Are they coming from Washington, D.C.? Are they coming from Reno, Sparks, where SNC is headquartered? I can learn all of those things, which tell me a lot about whether my campaigns are working. I do think for young companies, and I think many folks in this room are in that area, there's a lot more opportunity when it comes to earned media as opposed to paid. When you're a really young company and you have no budget, basically, like no budget for anything, and people are working for free or for nothing, like on the hope of some equity that could somehow materialize sometime, then there's no point in paying for advertising. There's no point, with all due respect to Edelman, of hiring the Edelmans of the world in order to accomplish your PR objectives. Do what you can to try to earn people's attention. Because marketers have it easy. They can just pay to get attention. Communicators have to earn it, which means that you have to sell a compelling story. And so that's what you can do as a young company to try to get attention on your company in a compelling way. And then as you grow, figure out how you're going to measure whether it actually works. And web traffic is still a pretty effective way for me to measure general brand awareness about Sierra Nevada Corporation over time.
Those are great points. So, Jeff, if someone wants to earn your attention in order to earn some coverage in your publication, what advice would you give them in order to do that?
Well, I think it's very important to have relationships built up. Just cold calling, not necessarily very effective. Just sending a press release over runs the risk of getting it lost in all the other press releases in my mailbox. It's really important to build up relationships with the media that are important to you, whether it's the space media, other technology media, local media, as early as you can in your business. Start building up those relationships. Let us know that you're out there, even if you don't have any news yet, to say, hey, we're out there, we're working on trying to win this contract for the satellite. Love to talk to you a little bit, give you a little background about what we're doing. That's great. You can find a time when I'm not socked in with other work to talk a little bit about what you're doing, get a little bit of background, be able to judge what you're doing, what you're up to, what to look forward to. It's always very useful from my perspective to know if you're anticipating a contract at a particular point, or you're out there raising money and you expect to close that round in a certain period of time, to know that's coming up so it's not necessarily a surprise when it comes out. But to build up those relationships as early as possible so that you're on my radar screen And I know to keep an eye out on you and what's going on so that when the news does come, I'm better prepared to report on it and provide a better perspective on what that means, rather than just having this press release suddenly show up in this mailbox about this company I may or may not know of, or may not have a lot of background about, and then trying to judge, is this really news? Is this a realistic plan? So really starting to set up those relationships as early as possible, even if, again, you're sort of at a low profile, maybe even sort of stealth mode and don't really have a lot to talk about. Laying the groundwork so we can provide better and more accurate coverage of what you're doing when you do have news.
So we've talked about earning coverage for positive news. What about bad news, Jeff? I talked a little bit earlier about some experiences that you've had with people sharing bad news with you in various ways. What are some of the things that are potentially maybe considered best practice in sharing bad news, or at least some learnings for people in the crowd?
I think a lot of times you're going to be judged on what happens when things go wrong as much as when it goes right. When you've got good news, hey, everyone's happy, you won the contract, the satellite's launched, that's all great, happy news. That's easy to share. But what happens when satellite malfunctions? What happens when you have a launch failure? What happens if you've got a setback and you've got to lay people off? Really, how you present yourself when that bad news comes is really going to say a lot about what the company is going on. I'll give one example, and I'll change the names to protect the innocent, or not so innocent as may be. There was a company recently, we called them Company X, that, well, you already know. Company X had some setbacks. They laid off a significant fraction of their workforce just before a holiday weekend, and sort of went into hiding, thinking that, well, maybe if we don't say anything, maybe no one will notice and no one will report on it, and we can just sort of fly under the radar. Well, no, that doesn't work, because within hours there are people on Facebook saying, "Oh, did you get laid off from Company X?" Yeah, and so did too. And soon the news is out on the grapevine, and we're out there. We're trying to get a hold of you, and you're gone into hiding and not responding to emails until Tuesday. And and then when you come out, in the case of this company, they actually, by the time the holiday weekend was over, and everyone knew what was going on, they came out with a pretty good statement, a pretty good explanation of why they did this and what their focus is going forward. But that really should have gone out the Friday before the weekend when the layoffs took place, and to get out in front of the news and be proactive and saying, this happened, this is unfortunate, but we're moving forward. We wish the people the best, and here's our plans are going forward, rather than trying to fly under the radar and have everyone assume the worst. And let the rumor mill run into overtime over the next 3 days. So really, how you react to bad news and get out in front of it and explain what happened, and explain what's going on, and explain what your plans going forward are is very important. And it's much better than trying to hide and assume that we'll never cover the story, because that may only encourage us to go out and try and cover the story if you're not willing to talk about it.
It's a great story. So, Caitlin, in your experience, if you were to have, provide kind of some general guidance on dealing with the media, whether it's positive news or negative news, just some advice, what would you share with the group?
Have a concise and clear message, and practice a lot. You should always know your talking points, and always be consistent. I think our company, Planetary Resources, has done a really great job since we announced our company in 2012. Before that, we were in complete stealth mode. And since then, if you go through each of our blog posts and each of our press releases, there is a horrifying consistency among everything, because we really take pride in practicing and understanding every word. And that helps Jeff do his job when we can deliver him something that's clear, it's well thought out, and it's consistent with stories he's written in the past about us as well. And so, I think that's kind of just simply it, is, make sure you are clear and concise.
That's great. Brooke, advice? Dealing with the media?
Yeah, I think that there's one general rule of thumb in dealing with reporters and trying to sell your story that will increase your chances of actually getting the story written that you want. And that is focus on people. Focus on how your story actually has an impact on real people. Because if it's a thing, it's less likely to move me as a reporter. If you're pitching to television, it's never going to work if it doesn't have some human aspect to it. In fact, in television, it will generally need some emotional angle on it if it's going to fly. But most reporters are, if they went to journalism school, or even if they didn't, the sort of general editorial decision-making process typically has to do with, so why do I care? And so you have to ask the question of why the story that you're selling actually matters to people, if it's important or interesting or relevant in some way to the audience that you're trying to sell it to, and think about, in the same way from a business standpoint, you have to think about your customer's customer in order to be successful. If you're trying to sell a story to a reporter, you have to think about, well, the reporter's customer, which is typically the audience. So I think what generally gets forgotten is why does this matter to people? And so in the same way, when I first talked about the commercial space industry and its impact on people and its potential for impact is not particularly well known. I mean, all of us with our cell phones and the reliance on tools that are out in space right now and what we've learned from the commercial space industry as a result of that is not really well understood by the general population. So there's an opportunity there to keep the focus on people, and I think you're going to be more successful in selling your story.
And I'll piggyback on that with an example from one of our recent press announcements. Is we announced this new great Earth observation business called Ceres. And Ceres is using the same technology that we'll use to prospect for asteroids in the future, to simply look down at Earth and provide global insights to actionable insights to global markets here on Earth, like agriculture, oil and gas, and natural disasters. And so when we were preparing for this press announcement, we had a lot of collateral that we were putting together, like infographics, B-roll clips for any potential television spots, things that Jeff could insert into his article. And from our perspective, and from kind of inside the industry perspective, the technology that we were announcing was well received and well kind of understood about its applications. And when we took it to some of the more mainstream, like MSNBCs and CBSs of the world, the thing that grabbed them was not the thing that we are really focusing on as much from a business perspective. Ceres, we are very focused on agriculture. It's going to really help kind of the farmers of the world, and we're really excited about that. And I could talk about that for hours, but that's not what this is about. And we were kind of really pitching that story as our big business, and revenue stream is going to be through agriculture and oil and gas. And but what caught the eye of some of the mainstream media was forest fires, because Ceres can help detect and track forest fires, and that is something that is emotional. It's something that when a forest fire is happening, it's spreading, is a huge national story. And so it all goes back to kind of how you cater your pitches within the space industry. The nuances of the technology we're building are very important, but in some of the more mainstream channels of the local news, forest fires is what really gets them going. So that's kind of just an interesting takeaway from us, is to understand just the different audiences and what they react to, and emotion is a big factor.
And Jeff, advice about dealing with the media from a reporter?
Yeah, I would love if every company was 100% transparent about what they were getting with their future plans. I know that's not realistic, but my advice would be, be willing to share a little bit more than you might think you want to help stretch, help better put your story into perspective about what you're doing and what you're trying to say. Don't just regurgitate the lines from the press release, but be willing to share a little bit more about your plans, your vision, and so on. Because that, I think, really does a much better job of helping me, but also helping our audience, better understand what you're planning to do, what your capabilities are, and what sets you apart from other companies in the field.
That's great. So say I'm an entrepreneur and I want to get into start doing some marketing or communications in general, and I have an idea, or I have a soon-to-be announced product, or not yet announced product. Where do I start? Caitlin, Brooke,
So I have an idea, but I sort of come to it with a bias because of my background in news. I would suggest, it's a very difficult and coveted position, but I would suggest starting early on the application process to be Jeff Faust's intern. Because I do think that having some background in news, especially if you're working alongside a subject matter expert who really understands the forest and the trees of the commercial space industry, can really help you get a broad overview and learn how to communicate what's most important. So I think having experience in journalism, you can easily translate that into the business world. Because then when you go into a company like Sierra Nevada Corporation, or probably any company that's represented in this room, you have a sense for how to distill down. I mean, it's amazing to me how rare the skill seems to be, just being able to distill down information and communicate it in a concise and succinct way, and what's most important comes first, and nothing more than what's absolutely necessary to be communicated. Like Mark Twain said, if he had more time, he would have made it shorter. You learn over time how to write in a concise and compelling way, and a lot of that comes with experience in journalism, and it can be extremely helpful when you get into the business world too.
I think on the other end, if you're coming into, you're an entrepreneur in the space industry, and you're technically minded, you're engineering minded, and your experience and expertise is not in communication, and you're really trying to bootstrap your idea, and you need help, but you can't have the Edelman on retainer. You can't hire someone full time and give them a 401k. There's a lot of resources out there now that are really wonderful that I know I've used personally. Our company has used, like Fiverr, for example. If you need someone to write a press release for you and you don't know how to do that, Fiverr is an online website just full of freelancers. And a lot of them are very accomplished. Some of them are retired in their career. Some of them are new in their career working for agencies. And you can see their portfolios and their resumes and pay someone $100 to do a couple hours of copywriting for you. And so if you're really trying to bootstrap an idea and you just need some help to get off the ground, we've just found a lot of internet resources. And Fiverr also, people have designed logos for us and T-shirts for us using that service as well. And sometimes you find people that you didn't know were interested in the space industry who are really contributing to your team on using freelancers like that, and you can bring them into the fold as well.
Terrific. All right, well, I think we should probably open it up to some questions. And in order to do so, do we have one over here?
Do I win?
You will.
Dan Tynion from The Guardian. So, Brooke, you talked about everyone goes digital first. But I'm wondering how you guys prioritize. If you had a choice to be covered, say, a feature in SpaceNews, front page of the New York Times, cover of Wired, lead story on CNN, or a splashy story in BuzzFeed, what's most important? Where would you want to be?
With all due respect to The Guardian, I would rather be on AP or Reuters just because, impact, whatever, ROI, like minimal effort, maximum return. If you can get yourself on a wire service, then you're done, basically, because it gets everywhere. So, typically if you have good contacts at wire services, you can get a pretty good return on that effort. But then, it does depend too where you have the best contacts. I mean, in some cases where the story is particularly sensitive, it's worth it to me to leverage a relationship I've invested in, because I'll know that that reporter is going to spend the time and effort to get the story right and to represent it well. I mean, I have no expectation that I'm ever going to be able to read anything in advance of publication. I have no unrealistic expectation like that. But trust is really, really, really important. It's as important to me on my end as it is for the reporter, because the reporter's reputation is on the line too. So if there's a story that is really sensitive and I need to make sure I'm going to get it right, or that the reporter's going to get it right, it's worth it to me just to go to one outlet where I can be assured of that kind of accuracy.
So trust more important than audience, size of audience.
Depends on the story, but in general, yes.
Caitlin, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it depends for us also what our business goals are and the objectives. If we're talking about, our serious business in agriculture, I mean, we would definitely go after an agriculture-specific publication to kind of be the lead on that story. Or if it's more general corporate news, like a round of funding, certainly we'd love the New York Times to be writing about that. So it really depends. Going back to what we've said the whole time is every pitch is different. And if you have those relationships that Brooke talks about, then you can understand who to go to for the story you've got.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, I just want this on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
First of all, I just want to thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it. And I thought there were a lot of really interesting insights about what you talked about sort of the relationship between communications and media. I guess my question is a little bit more tailored to the media versus the in-house people. What sorts of insights and thoughts and strategies do you have as far as selling a story directly to the public? I guess that'd be the question for Brooke and Caitlin. And this is sort of piggybacking on an idea that came up yesterday, which is, as an industry, is NewSpace doing a great job of selling its story to a general public? So as far as not using the media as an intermediary or using a press release, how do you directly communicate with the world in general? New microphone. Oh, and then Jeff, my question for you is as far as your audience, how do you feel are you satisfied with the number of people that are reading SpaceNews? How do you plan to grow that and get more people into the fold? And how do you appeal to a general public about this, what we think is very exciting, but maybe not as many people are excited about it now?
Great. Well, let me start off with that. I mean, SpaceNews is tailored very much at the people in the space industry, professionals, people who work in Capitol Hill, people who are involved, very much, but also people who are really strongly interested in space. Maybe you're not necessarily, in the space industry, but you're very interested about what's going on. You want to find out more detail than you're going to find perhaps in a more general news story. So certainly we hope that as the industry grows, that audience grows as well. We're never going to be a general interest publication. That's not our focus. We're really focused on serving the needs of the professionals in the industry and people who aspire to be professionals in the industry. On the question about how to reach the general public, I'll be a little bit of a devil's advocate here and say, do you need to reach the general public for a lot of what you want to do? I think there's always been, in the broader space community, the space advocacy community, a desire, if we can only get the general public interested, all our problems will be solved. Congress will turn on the money spigot and we'll be able to do everything that we want to do. We've been saying that for decades and that's never really happened. The question is, can you achieve what your goals are as an individual or company organization without needing to appeal primarily to the general public versus specific customer sets versus specific industry sets versus specific political sets in terms of you're trying to line up funding of one kind or another. Being much more focused in what your outreach is, particularly if you're a small organization with limited capabilities, you're probably going to be a lot more effective if you tailor that message rather than trying to reach out to the general public and have a fairly broad but diluted message. So I know that's maybe a little bit heresy there about that, and I'm certainly not opposed to informing the general public more, but depending on what your particular goal or particular mission is, you might be better served by focusing your message on a much more tailored audience.
I'll go ahead, Brooke.
I think it's not an either-or proposition. I mean, SNC, for instance, I'm not sure that our interests are best served by building up a huge audience on Facebook, just because that's not our people are not necessarily on Facebook in a natural way. But I think you could say that despite the commercialization of the space industry, it has taken and will continue to take a lot of government investment and involvement in order to in order for there to be progress for many of the companies in this room, including SNC. So to the extent that it will always be to a certain degree a B2G heavy industry, galvanizing the public in your favor will always help in that effort. And I think that's the big opportunity of social media, is the ability to find that tailored audience. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be marketing to teenagers or whatever, because that's probably not going to get you where you're going. But if you can find the people who can make a difference and who will be like really eager because they love the proposition of getting to Mars or whatever, and so find the demographics of that group that's going to help to further your cause before the government audience or the NASA, say, or the congressional audience that will make a difference for your company, then I think it's definitely worth it and like potentially necessary if you make the decision that actually you can't get there without that kind of support.
And I would say at Planetary Resources, we are really community focused, and there's not a lot of hard business goals that go along with that, other than our company's vision includes education. And so one of the most amazing and fun things about my job is, being able to write a blog post and always have, kind of new interesting thoughts about asteroids and things that tap into like the innate human curiosity factor, the exploration gene, as we were talking about yesterday. And so I believe that, education and tapping into kind of the curiosity of the masses is really important for our industry, because everyone is so curious about what's going on in space. I mean, look at the history of our nation. You go back to the Apollo era, the space shuttle era, and how fascinated, the entire nation was about that. And I think we're seeing that kind of again today with, Elon's visions of going to Mars, and Jeff Bezos taking many tourists per week to suborbital. And, I can't tell you how many times someone asked me to go kind of into the pop culture part of this, is Bruce Willis your boss? Who here has seen Armageddon? There's some young people. All right, well, I do not work for Bruce Willis. But pop culture certainly bridges the gap between conversations between, the quote-unquote general public, which is such an obtuse term, and, the real science and the technology nuances that are going on, inside our offices every day. And when someone comes up and asks me that, I know that in their mind, they are picturing an asteroid in orbit around the Earth that is highly metallic. So I don't have to explain to them where asteroids are, what they're made out of, and where they exist. The only thing I have to convince them is that asteroids actually aren't that bad. They're really awesome. So, I mean, pop culture, I think, is something that is, really thriving in our industry right now with movies like The Martian and Star Wars and things like that. And it's a sign of our times. If you go back to just a history of television media dating back to, the 50s when sitcoms came out, if you look at all those shows, Mary Tyler Moore, The Jetsons, Leave It to Beaver, they were all reflections of our society. And media puts dollars behind things that are popular threads in our society, and space right now is certainly one of those. And so because of that, it will always be an educational component of all the marketing and communications messages that I have, whether or not that makes us more money.
Great, thank you.
Okay, first I want to thank whoever said that reporters were human beings. You don't hear that very often. I haven't. Second question is, Jeff mentioned a company that started with X that had some problems and didn't react very well. I was wondering what the panel thought of the company that started with V that had even bigger problems not long ago. And I'd like to see how how you guys think they handle that, and whether the press was very good at that as well and covering it. Anybody want to take that?
That particular company had a particularly bad day, particularly tragic day.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I think we all sort of look back and say, should we have seen things earlier? Were we aware of some of these issues? I think a lot of the issues that came out, say, of the NTSB report, were, enlightening, certainly to me, in terms of some of the issues that they were having that weren't, I think, widely known.
No, because the media didn't cover much of that.
Because sometimes it's difficult for the media to cover some of these things because again, a lot of these companies don't necessarily share a lot of what's going on behind the scenes.
Right.
And again, as I was saying earlier, I wish every company would be 100% transparent of what's going on, but that isn't the case. Certainly encourage companies to be more transparent about what's going on and discuss both the good and the bad.
Well, just a follow-up. I mean, do you think if the media coverage had been more critical before that, like, you'd get invited to their events?
That's a hypothetical I don't think I can answer.
I can answer it.
So we're just about out of time. Maybe we'll just do one final question. You want to do one final question?
This is a two-part question. Both of your companies are really influenced by... Oh, I'm sorry.
Should I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, damn it. So we've been talking about multiple media outlets and how companies have reached out to multiple media outlets and tailored their message accordingly. But there's also the case that in the case of some companies, you have multiple outlets that are sending information to the media. So the most famous example is probably SpaceX, where Elon Musk is probably the #1 source of news. So if somebody is supposed to be in the position that, for instance, Caitlin is in, then is it important for there to be only one source of information for the outside world, or can there be multiple sources, or like one person?
I would need so many more followers on Twitter in order to be that source.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that again, it kind of depends on your company's goals, and certainly Elon's a figurehead. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there's been some discussions behind closed doors about the strategy behind him being the first to tweet for a successful landing or not. And I'm sure that he has just insisted in certain cases to be that figurehead. But I think it depends on your brand. It depends on what your objectives are. And sometimes the person at the helm, they're always going to be the kind of authority and the guiding voice in the company. Then they're the ones to do that. But I always believe in controlling the message a little bit more and being a little more strategic. And that's where I'll stop.
Okay.
All right. So I think we're out of time. Thank you all for this great discussion. And sorry we couldn't get to everyone else's questions. Apologies, but we need to move on to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. We'll have a networking break now until 3:45, and we'll start our next panel.